Everybody, this is the final part of the second wave feminist video series. We're going to cover the legacy of the second wave feminists and the second wave feminist poets and writers. So let's think about the legacy. One of the great achievements is the reshaping of the canon. And what second wave feminists want to do is reclaim past writers. This is all what Diving into the Wreck's about. And if you're like me, a millennial, when I was in high school, the curriculum was primarily white men. This wouldn't be the case all over America, but it was in my high school. So this shows that their legacy is still a project that's being developed. And it just doesn't accurately represent history to just have white men. There were women writers and they were important. So the second wave feminists bring these back in the canon. And if you're studying literature today, you're going to see this variety of voices. So that was an achievement. It's still an achievement that's a work in progress because it hasn't been universally integrated and it often still has to be fought for. Number two, they're also reshaping the contemporary canon. As you'll see as we get to the final units in the class, we have much more diverse writers in terms of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, race, etc., as well as sexual orientation. So while they reclaim past writers in the present tense, women are now being integrated in literary journals. Now this isn't a one-to-one representation and this work isn't done. Many people say it's about 30% women to 70% men. This is better than the 60s and 70s, but there's more than 50% women in America. So it's still not, the work's not done. Number two, women's writer groups in the 60s and 70s, primarily 70s I would say, they're writing outside the academy, they're reading poems together, they're doing poetry readings, they're doing poetry workshops. Partially because they're excluded from the academy, this leads to democratizing moment where women of different social classes are now writing poetry. This also influences the MFA movement, which is the primary way writers are integrated in the academy today. So, the women's writers groups and the MFA workshops help integrate women into the so-called literary mainstream. Remember, we've been talking about radical poets, so they're often in small presses, whereas now women are integrated into university presses and major presses. Finally, the range of subjects available in literature increases. Whereas you used to have to write about great themes, primarily imagined through the male eye, now you can write about interior issues. You can write about having children, what it's like to be a mother or a father. And Kevin Young speaks about this in the Change the World Poetry Foundation documentary. He says, I couldn't write about my children if these women hadn't pioneered the way to these new subjects. And again, we're going to write about our bodies more as bodies rather than subjects of observation. Alright, we talked about some of the successes of the legacy. Now let's talk about some of the challenges. One thing is they struggle to fully integrate their objectives. So writers of color are not fully integrated in the movement. It's primarily middle-class women. We of course see Lord and Walker, but they would have been kind of an exception to the rule. Now Lord, Walker, bell hooks, they're going to write pivotal essays that argue for the inclusion of people of color into the women's rights movement. And in the subsequent waves of feminism, this goal is imperfectly achieved but more fully achieved. Working class women are also not really represented in this movement. It's primarily middle class women. I'd say Walker might be an exception in stories like Everyday Use. And again, subsequent waves of feminism wants to include the working class and their ideas. Finally, the LGBTQ coalition, it's more like lesbians in this part of the movement. And subsequent waves will include these other parts in that project of solidarity and liberation. The next thing to think about is that backlash to the Equal Rights Amendment. And as Green points out in the Crash Course video, it says women and men people regardless of their sex or gender are equal under the law. And this bill is not passed, so women don't have formal legal equality in men. And this is a consequence for trans people today too. So even though they have these radical goals, something as basic as formal equality of the law is not achieved. So this shows there's significant, sustained backlash to the equality of women that continues to the present day. And it's devastating, really. And I would say this is more of a critique on their opponents and the movement itself. Much like the other protest movements of the 60s and 70s, I would say the forces that kind of dominate American life, they say, we will give you permission to express yourself, but we are not going to give you the second ask you have, which is justice and equality. This is really kind of the same thing with the civil rights movement too. So we'll give you formal expression, but we're not going to grant you your requests for economic equality and justice. So the protest movements kind of give us a better range of expression where we're not stuck in traditional roles, but their second ask for economic equality and justice and how people are treated is not fully achieved, and this is what these movements still fight for today. The final aspect to think about is how this has inspired later movements of feminism. Me Too movement's most prominent today, I would say. Just think about 2 of the last 4 American presidents have credible claims of sexual misconduct. 2 of the Supreme Courts nominated in my lifetime have credible claims of sexual misconduct, but these are the people ruling the country. That's what the newest wave of feminism, which has sparked in the last 2 years, seems to be fighting against. And this was something they were fighting against back then. So there's a real legacy in the writing of these women's writers. Alright, thank you so much for watching these videos. I'll be looking forward to seeing your work this week.